It's some time since we last met, September 2020, with the intention of restarting these meetings of Joint Committee. But since our last meeting, of course, we had the second wave, another lockdown and so on. So there's been disruption. That means that we have a lot of catching up to do, but doesn't mean that nobody's been working in the interim, because we've all been working extremely hard, all the health boards involved in the Mid Wales area. So that's just what we have to accept, I'm afraid, that it's a bit later than normal. However, I would very much like to put in a plea for papers to be submitted a bit earlier than they have this time, because there's a lot of reading to do. And I know how busy everybody is, so that means reading papers in the middle of doing everything else. But it would be good if we could have everything in good time to distribute to the members of the committee. Unfortunately, we're unable to transmit this meeting live, so the meeting will be recorded and then put on the internet afterwards for people to view the discussions. It's not been possible to allow public involvement in the meeting, unfortunately, but members of the public have been asked to submit their questions in advance so that we can provide them with written answers. On this occasion, a formal meeting of the Mid Wales Scrutiny Group will not be held immediately after this meeting of the Joint Committee, but I've invited members of the group to observe the meeting and to submit any written comments or feedback or questions that they may have regarding the discussions after the meeting's concluded. And we're very grateful to have that Joint Committee to keep an eye on the governance and so on. We have already received some questions in advance from some members, which were being responded to outside the meeting. In terms of Welsh translation, I'm afraid, unfortunately, Microsoft Teams doesn't currently facilitate simultaneous translation, but we're aware that work's being done in, nationally to address this. I know that Zoom is ahead of Teams. I think they allow Russian and French translations of simultaneous translations of meetings. Not that we want them in Russian and French, I have to say. Protocols, can I ask everybody to turn off their microphones, put them on mute until they're invited to speak, because there are so many people here, it's likely that there will be interference with the sound otherwise. If anyone wants to ask a question or make an observation, there is always the messaging available on the chat bar. And then I will do my best to keep an eye on that and invite people in to speak. But in the event that I miss somebody, please do, shout, let me know. And then if my network does go down, Steve Moore has kindly agreed to take over. I'm hoping that it won't. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So thank you, everybody. I think that's about all the sort of preliminaries. I'd like to go on then to deal with the apologies and to welcome everybody. Although there are many people perhaps who don't know everybody on this meeting, many of us will know people. I'm afraid it would be rather laborious to go through everybody, asking them to introduce themselves. So would you just quickly, the first time you speak, explain who you are and what you do very briefly, so that those who haven't met before will have an idea. Apologies, we have had a number of apologies for absence from Joe Whitehead, Chief Executive of Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board, who is represented by Sally Baxter, Health Strategy in that health board. I'm assuming she's here. I'm looking for, yes, I can see her initials there, thank you. Jason Killins, Chief Executive of the Welsh Ambulance Service Trust, and I don't believe we have anyone here from WAST today. Councillor Kath Roberts-Jones from Powys County Council, Alison Bullman, Corporate Director of Children and Adults in Powys County Council. Dylan Owen is here, I believe, Head of Commissioning for Adults and Children's Services at Powys County Council. Dafydd Meirig, Gwynedd Council, I can't see anyone representing him. Rosemary Harris, Councillor Rosemary Harris, I think there's something busy going on in Powys County Council this morning, as far as I can gather. Nobody to represent her. And then Councillor Alan Lloyd-Jones, Ceredigion County Council, from the Mid Wales Joint Scrutiny Group. So those are the apologies and the people who have come along instead of those who are unable to, where possible. So I think that's sort of the preliminaries, and perhaps we can then go on to look at the rest of the agenda as quickly as we can to get through it as efficiently as we possibly can. I think the next item then is a report from the lead chair, which is really a summary of new legislation, much of it, new legislation coming in very soon, for people to note. We're aware that there are quite a lot of very important key pieces of legislation now being implemented in Wales, and many of these are ahead of the rest of the UK and even in some instances the rest of the world. But I don't propose to dwell on these. You do have the paper summarising briefly all these things. Perhaps just to look at one or two issues that are particularly important. The socio-economic duty comes into force now on the revised date of the 31st of March 2021, or came into force, I have to say, and that will, I hope, prove to be very effective and important in the whole of Wales, and particularly in Mid Wales, where we do have some particularly deprived communities. And where the rural economy makes us very different to the rest of Wales. The Growing Mid Wales Partnership and the work it's undertaking around the Mid Wales Growth Deal is also important. There's going to be a report coming up on that, for which the health and well-being model needed to establish close links. And then the new Senedd members elected for the areas covering Mid Wales following the elections in 2021. And congratulations to all of them. Delighted to see who they are. There's a list, I believe, in your notes. Hope so. Yes, and some of us have already started making contact and meeting with them. You'll see Ellen Jones, AM, SM, I suppose now, also nominated as presiding officer, and indeed is presiding officer, I understand, for a second term. And Dwyfo Meirionydd, Mabon ap Gwynfor, SM, Montgomeryshire, Russell George, SM, Brecon and Radnorshire, James Evans, SM, and of course, important for health, Eluned Morgan for Mid and West Wales, Kevin Campbell, Mid and West Wales, Jane Dodds, Mid and West Wales, and Joyce Watson, again, Mid and West Wales. So we're hoping to establish good relationships with all of these people, get them on board to help us along the way in Mid Wales. So really that's just for information. I don't see any questions to me, much to my relief. So if you do have any, they're in such small print on my computer, I can't see them very well anyway, but I think that's probably okay. It's going to be difficult for me to do this unless I can somehow make that bit of my screen larger. So yeah, I think so. Yes, I can see some comments from Near about the NHS network not supporting Zoom. I know it's a shame, but never mind. Okay, thank you, everybody. Are there any particular questions? If not, perhaps we can move on to the report of Steve Moore, the lead chief exec, and Peter Skit as well. I don't know who's going to go first. Steve?
I'll kick off. Thanks.
Right.
Yeah. Firstly, just to add my congratulations to the successful MSs in the election, and we have already met with some of them in Hywel Dda as well. I mean, as Viv's already mentioned, it has been a bit of a while since we last met, and I guess I just want to reflect a bit on that first before just giving you a bit of an overview of the report. I should say we apologies, we sent out the appendix to the report quite late. I think it only came in this morning. If people have any particular questions around any of that, I'm very happy to take them offline, possibly through Peter. That might be the easiest route if there are any specific questions. But I guess just to reflect, we have just come out of probably the most difficult part of the pandemic across the whole of Wales, and the mid Wales included in that. And I guess firstly, I just want to record my huge thanks and admiration for all the staff in both health and care who ran towards the problem for the second time and responded with huge amounts of professionalism and kindness in what was, probably the most difficult winter that the NHS has ever faced. I'm sort of pleased to say, and for those who I talk to fairly regularly in our own patch, that I've been fairly downbeat and maybe a bit pessimistic at times. That actually I feel probably more optimistic than I have done since the pandemic started in terms of what we're now seeing over the last few months. The infection rates being low, the massive success across Wales in the rollout of the vaccination programme. I think Wales recently overtook, at least in first dose terms, Israel, which was seen as sort of one of the leading countries in the world. I think that's a huge testament, and I think gives us all hope that as we kind of move into reductions in the restrictions on our lives, that it's a sustainable move this time. But of course, leaves us with a huge legacy that we need to deal with. And I think the moral imperative on health and care services, I would say, is to build as positive a legacy from what everyone's been through as we possibly can coming out of the other end of this. So in terms of my report, you'll be able to see that there has been an obvious impact on the priorities that we set ourselves last year. Members will remember that I chair the executive group that oversees this operationally. And actually, that's a mixed picture, because actually for some of the things that we were hoping to do, like the shift to more digital telemedicine type processes, actually that was hugely accelerated through the pandemic. As someone in the new digital health and care Wales system said, the pandemic reduced everybody's fear of digital, clinicians and the public, I think. Clearly won't suit everybody into the long term, but particularly in rural areas, I think being able to offer services digitally to those who need them and those where it's clinically appropriate to do so, I think is a big step forward, and was really part of our vision for Mid Wales before the pandemic hit. However, there has been a less positive impact on many of the other priorities that we've set. So the paper simply sets out a kind of a bit of an overview about where we are. The group met recently to review that. And we're seeking today support really to roll forward many of those priorities now into 21-22 as we get into our recovery and restart mode. So you'll see in the paper there was a workshop actually in November, and the clinical advisory group has continued to meet. So if the committee are happy today, I'm happy to take any questions on the detail, although I may ask for some significant support from Peter and the team on that. But if the committee are happy for us to simply roll over that plan and continue work on it as set out in the paper, I'd be very grateful for that. So thanks, Viv. I'll hand back to you.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments for Steve? Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I mean, as you said, so much work has been done. People have been tremendous in rolling out the vaccinations across Wales. Wonderful. We've definitely beaten England. Certainly 18-year-olds in Wales have been vaccinated, but in England there's no sign of people under 30 at the moment, as far as I can see, being vaccinated.
Well, as Ellen will know, I keep saying it's not a race, but it's always nice to win it.
Yeah, yes. It's not a competition, I know, but yeah, I quite agree. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And there's plenty of information available in the papers that we received a little bit later. Thank you.
Viv, I think Sally wants you to come in with a question. Sally
right.
Baxter.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see. Yes, I can see now.
No problem.
Yes, Sally Baxter. Yes, certainly. Sorry, Sally.
Thank you. No problem. Dim problem, Borodal. I'm Sally Baxter. I'm Assistant Director Health Strategy. Forgive me for just coming back into this forum really after some time out seconded on COVID matters. So this may be a question that's already in hand through the PDEG and other groups. But just thinking about the what you've given in terms of context and background for where we are with the plan, and the need to run it alongside the recovery plans that we have later and make sure that we have some consistency of approach between the two. I'm thinking around long COVID, mental health, wellbeing. They're all there, I think, in the priorities and plan, but it's just that slight nuancing of picking up any additional needs that we might need to respond to. So apologies if that's already thoroughly been debated and is in hand. I'm sure it will be.
Well, I think, Sally, if I can respond, Viv, I think probably there's a bit more work to do on that alignment. Each health board, as you'll be aware in your role, has been working on its sort of recovery plans, not quite separately. There has been some discussion, but actually there's so much to do, and we are still very much at the early stages of that, particularly with the new Senedd now coming in with its own priorities. The work of the executive group has been very much around the pre-existing priorities. There are obvious overlaps. And there may be things that the executive group needs to take on board. So I know you're a member of that group or are represented on that group. So I think we need to probably pick that up in overview to see whether there are some things that make sense to be done on an all mid Wales basis rather than just in individual health boards, particularly in relation to say to things like long COVID and how we support people who may have long-term rehab needs.
Okay, happy with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Right. I can see another hand, couple of hands have gone up. Yes, Carol Shilabir and Hayley Thomas. Hayley, I think your hand might have gone up first.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. It's just a bit of good news. Apologies, it's not updated in the paper, but we have just in terms of the content of the paper around the integrated care hubs. Just wanted the committee members to be aware that we have now started the project on site in Machynlleth for the Bwllgor Community Health and Wellbeing Hub. We started last week and we're progressing with that project. So very happy to come and present at a future meeting the progress in taking that forward. At last, I say, but really pleased to be able to report to the committee the progress that we've made there. And I think the second point, just building on the point around recovery, I think that one of the challenges will be when we look at the recovery and priorities moving forward is some of the choices we might have to make around where we will get the greatest impact for the population of Mid Wales together. So I know we've shared our original plans and this is an ongoing piece of work, but just some reassurance really that we'll be looking at the whole picture again, not just from a health perspective, but the whole system. Because I think in particular, if you look at the 4 harms and the framework we've been working to, particularly working with the local authority, the community and the third sector is going to be a really important part of our recovery. So I think it's about how we look at the total picture, not just the sort of health backlog recovery aspects, but also that broader recovery in partnership. Thanks.
Thank you, Hayley. That's really encouraging. It's good. Carol?
Yeah, thanks very much. Hayley's covered off a couple of my points.
Yeah, I thought she might.
The list of priorities looks very long, and then when you add in recovery elements, and then you potentially add in new ministerial priorities and emphasis, I think we'll have to be careful not to overcommit and underdeliver as a joint committee, and the sense that needing to perhaps sift and sort a little bit in terms of the higher impact priorities, just to underline that I think we might have to do that. And the sense as well that, yes, clearly these are wider priorities than where people have tended to pick up the legacy, which is around planned care operations and outpatient appointments and things like that, but much broader, particularly around mental health and children and young people in particular, and the impacts that they have had disproportionately. So it was just a word of caution that we try and hold ourselves back a little bit in terms of how much commitment and motivation there is, and balance that up with being discerning about a few really key priorities, and I'm sure that will come out in the wash now over the next couple of weeks and months. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Carol, for that good sense. The next person, it's Councillor Ellen Gwyn.
Thank you, Viv. What is our help? It's nice to see you all once again. We haven't met for quite a time now. But I just want to thank you for this, looking forward, and the fact that we've already restarted colorectal surgery in Bwllgor. I was very pleased to see that you're hoping to include urology in what is the service that is available in Bwllgor going forward. And I would agree that mental health will need a lot of emphasis as well during the post-COVID. I think a lot of people who do have long COVID seem to be also suffering from mental health problems. So all of that, and from what I understand as well, some of our young people in schools, they've been under quite considerable pressure, having to undergo their assessments rather than exams as usual. And I think it has affected some young people's mental health. So those are fields that, I'm glad to see that you've got the strategy for developing Bwllgor still there, although I understand it may not come to pass as soon as we would have liked. But I do think immediately it's post-COVID and mental health, young people and older people possibly, that are going to take up a lot of your time going forward now. But thank you for the work, and thank you, Steve. We've been working together over the past year and more, and we've been very grateful for that close working together between the Health Board and the County Council here in Ceredigion. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Yeah, it's been really great joint working, I think, across our whole patch. So thank you for that, and it's been really encouraging, all of the stuff that we've been able to do together. I can't believe I didn't mention colorectal surgery, given what an obsession it's been for some time now. But yeah, I think Simone, our new colorectal surgeon, is settled in well and is operating a big step forward. I was just going to ask Peter, because I'm thinking, Peter, that the urological clinics have restarted again, or they were about to, whether we could give some confirmation around that, whether that's happened or whether the plan is now fixed.
I can confirm, Steve, as of this morning, that they will recommence on the 7th of June.
Oh, good. Thank you. Good news again. Thank you, Steve. I can see Katie Blackburn wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just thought it might be helpful from the discussions that have just taken place, just to share with members that as a CHC in Powys, we have this week signed off a mental health survey for all young people in Powys, the results of which would perhaps be useful to feed back into this committee, but could also be perhaps replicated across other parts of the Mid Wales Regional Committee. So the last young persons survey that we did, which was on orthodontics, we had 800 responses. So I'm hoping that we will receive a similar response, and that's all secondary school up to the age of 20. So just to alert you about that piece of work that's going on.
Oh, thank you very much, Katie. We look forward to seeing, what they have to say. That's really important. Right, I think we can possibly move on to the next agenda item. Very important, recovery in Mid Wales. I don't know whether Steve or Peter is going to take this item.
I'll just say a few words and then hand over to Peter, if that's okay, Peter. But just to say, we've already covered, to some of the theming here around there is a huge amount to do in recovery, and it isn't just about planned care, although that in itself is a daunting challenge, given the scale of what we've seen in the last year. But services are starting to recommence across the area, and I think that is positive. I think there's always, for me, a little bit of a note of caution to add to Carol's, not just about not over-promising, but also the need to ensure that we give our staff a break in all of this. It's really easy to say, but I know there are a lot of people who are waiting for our care, and I understand the pressure there. But staff are, if not physically exhausted because of what they've had to deal with in their working lives, they're mentally exhausted because of a year of being on high alert and sort of, anxious about things. And many staff have made personal commitments or personal sacrifices even to be able to continue to work by separating themselves from friends and family, for example. So there is just something around, yes, we absolutely need to get our recovery plans together. And what you have here today is probably the first cut of that. There's so much more work to do on this, but gives you a sense of where we're going, guided, as Hayley mentioned, around the 4 harms. But I'm keen that we don't just race into the next set of challenges when we do need people to have a bit of time to process what they've just been through over the last year. So with that preamble, Peter, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add.
Only to say really a big thank you to organisations for working with us on supplying these and working these through, because this hasn't been easy in terms of everybody's workload that is ongoing anyway in terms of pulling this together. Secondly, to thank operational teams actually for the work that they've done with us over the last year and a bit, because it hasn't been easy for operational teams to be involved in the work that we've been working with as well, and I think that's really important to note. And again, I think it's really important that we see health and social care restarts in here, and the recovery plans and how we're starting, because it is a joint effort, and I think it's really for us to remember that we're in this together across the patch as a health and care. And I think from what you can see in front of you here, there's an awful lot of work going into the initial stages, and I think I'd reiterate again, I think this is the first stage of recovery, and as Carol said earlier, I think we've got to be agile in our approach here, because I think things will come out of the woodwork that we'll need to work on with some immediacy as well across the patch, and I think we've got to be sort of flexible enough to be able to understand that as we go forward.
Yes, thank you. Jack, would you like to come in then?
Yeah, thanks, Viv. I've just wanted to, if I may, for 1 minute, start with a brief story which reminds everyone of why this organisation was set up, and that is a family that live near here. It's a father, mother, and a daughter. The daughter has been working from home, has had mental health issues. The mother has been being treated for cancer and is just finishing chemotherapy. And the father has got urological problems and has had a catheter fitted. During the crisis, they have spent a lot of time doing many miles across Mid Wales, and the daughter is the carer for the 2 parents. So every time she has to go somewhere, not only is it stressful for her, but also it means that she is taking time off work. She has actually now run out of holiday, not a particularly sympathetic employer, so they're in a real struggle. So it just reiterates the importance of services being available as close as possible to people's home. I'll just start with that, and then I would just like to ask a few questions, which is, I fully appreciate with the recovery plans that people do not wish to put in black and white dates when things are likely to happen and where they're likely to happen. But I think what it would be nice for the people of Mid Wales to see is a reiteration of the commitment from all the organisations that sit around this table, that they will be working together to use the facilities that are in Mid Wales to deliver services to the people. So when reading the recovery plans, it was slightly disappointing to me that each health board seemed to be doing it on their own. I appreciate there is now a push for regional solutions, but that wasn't coming out to me from the individual health boards' recovery plans. So I think what the people, certainly the messages I'm getting are, please can we have, if the solutions are going to be, part of it is going to be through the private sector, that's not going to be very convenient for anybody in Mid Wales. So we need some commitment from the organisation sitting around this table to say we will support each other's facilities where they are in order to ensure the maximum can be done in the area. And finally, on a specific question, on the Haldar ones, why is it impossible for Bwllgor to be designated a green site so that a huge amount could be done there? I'm sure there are perfectly good reasons, but I failed to grasp them, and I have been asked that by several people. And one further point on it's probably Haldar specific, but it may be true of other health boards. Due to the huge workload and the way people have been under pressure, I think there's a certain amount of lack of communication or going for the easiest option, which is entirely understandable. But things like the centralised appointment system, there's been a tendency for everybody to be called to Carmarthen, even when the service is back up and running elsewhere. And I think that's purely a matter of workload and communication. And I think it would be important to ensure that the people making the appointments are aware of what's happening where in a timely manner. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant and a few questions in one, but over to you, Viv.
Yes, thank you. Just for the sake of clarity, Jack, each health board is required by Welsh Government to produce its own recovery plan. So, you know, that probably accounts for one of your concerns. It doesn't mean people aren't working together. I know the chief execs meet regularly, as do the chairs. Steve, do you want to come in, or would you like to deal with Jack's questions outside?
I'll come in, Viv, if that's right, just to give a bit of a general overview. And actually, there are some specifics in there, if that's right. I mean, I think, Jack, very happy to reiterate our commitment to the Mid Wales services in Mid Wales. I think we've never been in any doubt of that. The development of the Bwllgor strategy, you know, the bringing back of colorectal surgery, I think is demonstration of our desire to continue to do that. And you know, whatever the pandemic has done to services, we need to ensure that we you know, be assured that we continue to work on the basis of Bwllgor, as we said in our strategy back in November 2018, remains strategically important for the Mid Wales community. But thank you for the challenge. You know, I think we've got to keep our feet in the fire. You know, it's not an unreasonable ask, and so much has changed over the last year. Just to add to Viv's response around the individual health board plans, yeah, I think it's a fair comment, but I would say, you know, the pandemic, particularly the second wave, was no respecter of our normal planning rounds. I was talking to Welsh Government about this yesterday. You know, by the time we came out of that significant wave, it was quite late in the planning process, and actually our teams were tired. So what you have is really, I think, probably, I can at least speak on behalf of Haldar, if not the other two health boards, is very much a first iteration, our first attempt. And as Viv said, Welsh Government wanted to see individual health board plans. I think in response to my response to the earlier question, knitting that all together and seeing what that looks like for the Mid Wales community, I think will be a useful step along the way. But there's so much more to do on getting these plans together. On the issue of a green site, we are actively looking at that. I think care has to be taken with that, particularly in a rural area like Haldar or indeed Mid Wales more generally, in that to establish a green site, you have to. It's very difficult to have an undifferentiated emergency department front door because you don't know the COVID status of people, and whatever the current rates of infection, the virus is still out there and able to get in to hospital settings. So in establishing a fully green site, that could have significant implications for the emergency services that we provide, as I say, on an undifferentiated basis. But we are seriously looking at that across our health board service to see whether it would be possible to do that in some way. And on the centralised appointment system, yeah, I can only apologise if that's been happening. I think partly in our defence, I think so many services changed over such a short period of time. Actually, even keeping the clinicians updated with where things were was probably a challenge, and certainly for our central booking teams. But you know, things are now getting back to settling down and restarting, so I'm hoping that will also significantly improve. But I'm always happy offline if you have any examples that you want me to look into, just to make sure that we are keeping on track with that. I'd be very happy to pick them up with you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jack. Carol, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks, Jack. I think it's always important to hear what people are talking about in the communities. It's a useful reflection, and I recognise some of it was very specific, but just to come in on a couple of things really from the Powys and the Mid Wales perspective. I think as you know, we work with health boards and trusts right the way around our borders. So we're trying to support people to access pathways as they would usually have done, if you like, pre-COVID. But as Steve indicated, there have been changes, and so we're tracking those through very carefully and understanding in terms of recovery planning what the art of the possible is. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had, though, where perhaps access, waiting times, if I call it that, to services may be shorter if people were to travel a little bit further. And I wouldn't want to close down that discussion or that opportunity at times. I know that I heard Katie earlier mention this. One of the things that we've chatted about with some of our community health council members, because without putting too fine a point on it, the access times for some specialties are really not good. The worst I've ever seen in my 11 years in Powys anyway, for the Powys population. So we want to be quite open-minded, but to work with individuals and with families around the best way to access care. So as Steve said, these plans are still in the forming stage. You know, some we're a little bit clearer on than others, and we've been able to make some early progress in some areas, but they'll continue to be influenced, I hope, anyway, and I believe, by the feedback that we get from people in our community and our professionals involved as well, of course. So thanks for the feedback there, Jack.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Jack. Was that all right, or did you want to say anything else?
I'll just briefly reply, Viv. I do fully appreciate the pressure that people have been under, and I think what the people round here want is just a commitment that, you know, strategically thinking, maybe the easiest solution is to go, you know, if you take the 100 million that's been offered as a part of the catch-up plan for, I believe it's for elective, I'm not entirely sure, then one of the very easy options is to buy capacity from the private sector. And I fully appreciate that some people will be happy to travel a bit further to get their service a bit earlier. But as a strategic solution for Mid Wales, I just want to know that there is thought being given to where else we might invest that money in order to bolster services that already exist, to ensure that actually, for the vast majority of people, we're not going to make them make that decision between distance and the service they can get.
Okay, thank you, Jack. We'll see how things develop, and you know, I'm sure we'll be hearing more from you and you from us. Gabriella, your hand is up. Would you like to come in?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So far, the discussion has been very much around the provision of services and the pressures that the staff have been under, and ways in which we can go forward in ways which bind the different strategies together across the 3 health boards and the county councils and so on. I'd just like to put in a word for patients and clients, and in so doing, perhaps work up from my own and my husband's individual experiences during COVID, dealing with COVID as a context, but also focusing down on conditions which have arisen, health conditions which have arisen during COVID, and in my husband's case, having COVID restrictions and the complications of that on top of existing comorbidities. And in so doing, I'd like to go back to the issue of trust and how important it is now to carry the trust that was inculcated in patients at the, you know, during the inception of this committee, previously board, and look at ways in which now, in the against the experience of COVID, we can continue to carry that trust and confidence in our services forward. I think everyone understands that normal services, if I can call it that, have been hugely disrupted. But an important aspect of that we in this family and others have experienced is not knowing what is happening from a patient point of view, how this recovery is taking place, when certain clinics are going to be open, where people are now located on waiting lists for surgery, where that surgery is likely to be. And I know from the point of view of the provision of services, this is all evolving very rapidly all the time. And the situation is very fluid. But I wonder whether, in practical terms, something can be done about communication with patients who are embarking on a pathway or are midway in a pathway which has been disrupted, how we can carry people with us with good communication about where people are, because what they want to know is when their operation is likely to take place, where they are on the waiting list. So I wonder whether there's a role for a communications person to be in charge of, you know, disseminating the most recent information across the different specialties to patients, so that we can make sure that people are just so frustrated with the not knowingness of things.
Yes, thank you, Gabrielle, for pointing that out. I know how difficult it is for people and families. We're really concerned about that. And I don't know if any of the chief execs would like to come in. I can see Katie's hand is up, but maybe if Steve or Carol would like to come in now on that, please. Carol, would you go first, do you think? Sorry, Steve.
Sorry, Steve. Steve's got all the answers. No. Just to say that Gabrielle, and I won't speak for Steve, but I think Steve's organisation is doing something similar. But we're establishing a patient liaison type service. As you say, people are concerned about how long they'll need to wait, what they can do while they wait, and we're concerned to support people who may, you know, have a significant delay in accessing their substantive treatment, that we are able to offer support to them while they wait. And you know, I use this example. I had a lady write to me who is awaiting an orthopedic operation, and was asking me about how long she would need to wait and things. And it turned out that actually for her to have better outcomes from that orthopedic operation, it would be wise for her to reduce her weight. So what we have been able to do is to offer her some help and support on weight management, in order that by the time she is ready to have that operation, she's fitter and healthier and more prepared for it, and it becomes more successful in relation to that. And I use that example because I think there are probably a lot of people for whom the wait is sadly extended, but that we could support in a different way to that that we would have done previously. So those services are being established, and I'm pretty sure all health boards would be thinking in the same way, perhaps with slightly different ways of applying it, but certainly that liaison with patients and their families feels really important, Gabrielle. So hopefully that's helpful information.
Thank you, Carol. Steve, would you like to come in? I'm well aware that Katie's been waiting longer, but in response to this particular question raised by...
Thanks, Viv. And Katie, I'll be brief so that you can come in. Just to say, yeah, absolutely. I think really important point, Gabrielle. We've gone from having nobody waiting over 36 weeks in Hywel Dda to about 30,000 people now that all waiting for our care. A massive challenge. We actually started just before the second wave, the sort of a similar process to Carol's described, much more systematic than simply telling people roughly where they might be on the waiting list and when they might expect treatment, which in itself actually was quite difficult to predict back then because of the second wave came and significantly changed our plans. But is a really detailed waiting list support package, single point of contact program that the Bevan Commission are working with us on working beside us in Hywel Dda, which is essentially about the things that Carol said. Firstly, we know where you are. We know you're on the list. You haven't been forgotten, because that's clearly a worry for people. Secondly, this is what you need to do if things get worse or who you need to contact, and we're going to have a single point of contact in the health board to be able to support that rather than trying to ring individual clinical teams and medical secretaries. And then a range of advice and support, which has already started to go live on our websites about what you can do to help self-manage pain and other things. We started the pilot. We sent out 300 letters to our orthopaedic patients back in, I think it was in March, and we've been going through the process of all of those. And some of the experience we've had from that early on in that pilot was the number of people who've chosen now they don't want to have surgery. I think, COVID to an extent has changed people's risk benefit kind of equation in their own head about wanting to have major surgery. But also there are a range of people who, we have reconfirmed, we have been able to give support to. We're going to be rolling that out this year to all 30,000 people, and then it'll just simply become a bit of the way in which we work as an organisation. It won't just come to an end once we've got through the waiting list backlog, because I think it's really important that we're able to offer people alternatives to surgery, self-help, as well as ongoing contact with us as they're waiting for our care. So there'll be more coming out from Hywel Dda probably over the summer about where we've got with that. And there's some videos I know that are being done at the moment, talking to both staff and patients about what the experience is so far. Hopefully that reassures you, but your point's well made. It is a really important issue for us.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I hope you can take some reassurance from that, Gabrielle. Katie, was your comment on this one point, or was
yes,
considering
Chair, if that's okay, I'll be quite brief, I think, but I just wanted to confirm, Gabrielle, that we too obviously are picking up worries and concerns, and I think working really closely with Powys in my case, just to make sure that communication is key, but it's also making sure that things like GPs' websites are up to date and that sort of thing. And so we're doing a piece of work on that at the moment and looking at what enhanced services are actually being delivered. So I think communication is key, but I think it is also important just to reiterate what Carol was saying earlier about looking at how things might be done differently going forward in the future, but that all, making sure that is communicated with those patients and that those concerns are taken forward. So I think any opportunity to feed in to the health board is really, really important from a patient perspective.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you. Jack, is that a legacy hand or is it a new hand? Did you want to come in? Are you on mute?
It's a legacy hand. I do apologise.
All right. Well, it's a relief to me, I can say, because we need to get on with the agenda. Not that we don't want to hear you speaking if you've got something useful to say, Jack. But yeah, thank you. Right. So could you all please remember to put your hands down after you've spoken? Thank you. Katie, was there anything else you wanted to say? Oh, right. OK, Katie.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, it's difficult to see, how to manage. Right. Can we press on with the agenda then? That was a useful discussion. Thank you. Peter, do you want to take up the next agenda item?
I'll do that. Thank you, Chair. And Anna is here as well, should there be any
Yeah.
detailed questions.
Mm.
Obviously, the work programme for Rural Health and Care Wales is aligned to the work that is in the priorities for the Mid Wales Joint Committee.
Mm.
And again, I think we'll have to be agile enough to be able to change as we go through, because I think the priorities, as was mentioned earlier, may well change. We may need to make some focuses on areas that that maybe are not in the work plan at the moment. And I know that Anna is ready for that, and the management group are ready for that in terms of coming back and having to be able to change the focus as and when. This report has already been to the Planning and Delivery Executive Group and has worked its way through to the committee for approval, really, in terms of the way forward as it is standing today. But as I say, we may have to change some of these priorities as we go forward due to the changes in the circumstances we find as we work through the recovery plans, etc. I think I'm happy to take any questions on it. I don't intend to go through it in detail because I don't think there's any need to do that, but happy to take questions as people have at the moment, and I'm sure Anna will take any detail if we need it.
Right, thank you. Are there any questions? I can't see any hands up. No? Okay. Well, I think people can read for themselves what's in there. As you say, it's all very clear. Thank you, Peter. So we
I
can we go
suppose
to
formally,
yes.
I suppose formally, Chair, it is an approval. We're looking forward to move forward with this as it is at the moment, pending obviously any changes that might happen. Yeah,
thank you. Are we all happy to approve that then? Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, next agenda item. Do you want to, is Dr. Kate Wright here?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Oh, hello, Kate. Yes, sorry. I don't know whether you'd like to speak to your paper or just, would you like us just to receive it in writing? Is there anything you'd like to say?
I will, why don't I just give you a very brief summary? Just, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, so rather than go through all of it. So people may not have met me, so I'm been 3 months in post as medical director in Powys now, and I chair the Mid Wales Clinical Advisory Group. So the paper you have represents the summary of the last 3 meetings, not all of it, some of which happened before I started. To summarise the discussion, I think the themes of the discussion that we've had since I've come into post, I think there's been a lot of conversation about how we work collaboratively across Mid Wales. We've been talking about how we can best work together to get our services and some joined up thinking about how we manage careers for GPs, for example. So lots of conversation about that. Looking at some of the areas under a bit more pressure, which we've had some positive conversation about. We're discussing obviously the North Powys Wellbeing Programme. So I think lots of interesting areas to discuss. Also, there's a lot of work going on with value-based healthcare at the moment, and all the health boards are working towards that. And we've been having some really positive discussions how we might, it's rapidly developing, but how we might work positively together to make a really strong value-based healthcare network, which is really quite exciting. So I won't go into any of the detail of the rest of it. I can answer questions. So I'm sure Peter can help me if I don't do the detail for the rest. But yeah, very happy to answer any questions any of you have.
Are there any questions for Kate? No? I think it's as you say, it is self-explanatory. Carol, would you like to come in?
Yeah, it's a comment really, and I think it's relating to value-based healthcare. I wonder if people who perhaps aren't quite as familiar with that will wonder what that means, and just a thought potentially for the future on whether it would be useful for the Joint Committee to have a short presentation or something like that on value-based healthcare, because this really tries to work on the principles of what matters to people and what works, and so there's some really I think useful dialogue to have on, and raising awareness around that development. As Kate has said, we're working very productively on that approach across the region, and I think there was a lot of energy coming from those discussions that's been fed back to me.
Yeah, yes, that's a good idea actually, and people will be familiar with prudent healthcare, of course, which was in place, you know, when just about the time the Mid Wales group got together. So it would be really helpful in terms of an update for people to see what's happening. Thank you. And Jack?
Thanks, Viv. Thanks, Viv. Just on value-based healthcare, it can send shivers down the spine of people who live in rural areas when people talk about value-based healthcare. And I think perhaps Anna can say a brief word about some work that hopefully will be being done across Mid Wales in conjunction with the regional hubs. I don't know if Anna wants to come in on that. She's more up to speed than me on that.
It's just that, well, everybody is here, that Hugh, Steve's just mentioned how maybe Hugh could come and do a talk. He has convened meetings between all three health boards, and he asked us to look at developing a rural value-based healthcare hub across the three health boards, and that's been supported by all three health boards to try and get a rural perspective, because the current modelling is very much on urban-based parameters in terms of evaluating. So that's been considered, and there's been a series of meetings. There's another one beginning of June, but there may be a joint appointment from Powys, Betsy and Hywel Dda that is based then in Mid Wales. Just a project manager looking at collaborative projects in value-based healthcare, and that would be based within Rural Health and Care Wales potentially, but that's still under discussion at this stage.
Thank you, Anna. Yes. Well, we look forward to hearing more about it anyway. That's really interesting. We need to remind ourselves, and Jack in particular, that funding has now been agreed for the Rural Health and Care Wales work programme up until 2022. So, and Jack has been appointed as chair for a further 12 months. So, Jack, would you like to come in then with the next two sub-items on the agenda, items 6.2 and 6.3?
Yeah, fine. Should we do them in the other order? Should we do rural health and care first?
Yes, yes.
While we're on.
Yeah.
As you can see from the paper, we're asked, due to the change in the permanence of the funding, we thought it was appropriate to change the terms of reference, and the executive powers of Rural Health and Care Wales now have been delegated to the executive group of the Mid Wales Joint Committee, as you'll see from the new terms of reference. And where we were running an executive group and another group with a wider participation, we've merged them into the stakeholder group. It's a very big group, but I don't anticipate everybody will always turn up. People will turn up when there are areas for which they can contribute. So I hope everybody's had a chance to look at the new terms of reference. They're not set in stone. They will be constantly reviewed. But we'd like approval of the committee that this is the appropriate way for the executive function to be passed to the executive group of the joint committee. And so can we take that first? Are people happy with the amended terms of reference with that new governance structure?
Thank you, Jack, for explaining that. It does make sense. Is everybody agreed? You all happy to approve? Yes? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ellen, as well. Yeah.
And the other thing, which because of timing, I don't think has gone through the exec group, but we need approval for, is that we run our conference again this year, which has become a 2-day event in November. So we're seeking approval that the Joint Committee are happy for us to go ahead with that. If timescales had been different, it would have come through the exec group, obviously, but this year that the timings don't allow that. So we need the whole committee to approve the idea of us running a conference in November, a 2-day conference. And there's also a plan to start doing webinars throughout the year, as you've seen in the work plan. So we just want everyone's agreement that we should go ahead with that, please.
Everyone happy to agree that? It's just, it would be so nice if we could have a proper conference instead of a virtual conference, but I think that would probably be unlikely, yes.
It would be less exhausting for you and me.
Yes.
I think Hayley's got a hand up.
As far as the technology goes, but anyway, thank you. All right, thank you for agreeing that, everybody.
I think Hayley's got a question, Viv, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh dear, yes, I can see. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. It was just really a point, and obviously the conference has been very successful every year. It was just recognising November is winter and whether we should be thinking about the timing of the conference potentially being different on an ongoing basis, recognising hopefully we'll be okay, but you know, November could be a difficult month in terms of securing people's access to be able to attend a conference. So I know we picked that up very briefly in the executive discussion, but I think maybe not possible this year, but I think there's something about perhaps the timing of the conference being better outside of the winter period.
Yeah, thank you. Anna, do you have anything to say on that, or?
I was just going to say what Hayley said, really, that, yeah, I think for this year, because the timescales are so short, because the call for papers goes out in June, we'll stick to November, but I think what was decided that next year we will look at maybe, I think spring was raised, wasn't it, Hayley, at the planning and executive group meeting. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's a good idea. Conferences in spring are always lovely. Right, was anyone else wanting to come in? No, I don't think so. So would you like to move on to the Public and Patient Engagement and Involvement Forum, Jack?
Yes, indeed. I mean, several things that I was going to raise under this have already been raised in the meeting. I won't go through the paper. As everybody will know, engagement where you can't meet people has been quite an interesting departure. If you remember at the last meeting, what I was asking for was sources of reliable information. At the time, I think it was people were being confused by the various sources of information about what the state of play with the COVID was. After the meeting, I was pointed to a couple of very reliable public health sites, which we communicated to people that were asking, since when it hasn't been an issue. People have been able to get reliable figures as and when they want them. The next thing that cropped up was people desperately wanting to know information about vaccination. And I have to congratulate the health boards on their vaccination updates that come out regularly. And once people knew they were there, the questions about that soon receded. So I'd like to thank the health boards for those, which I think have been incredibly informative, very easily accessible, and I think a model for some other sort of, for want of a better word, idiots' guides to information that I think we want to make available to people. The third point is the one that Gabrielle has just raised, which is what I'm mainly hearing now is when and where about the recovery plans. And we've had a lot of discussion about the recovery plans, but the sooner we're able to put something like the vaccination guides or something like that, links to those on the social media sites, I think the better. If we can have that as soon as possible and in accessible form, that would be great. The final point I'd make is the trial work with the school council at Penglais was just about to start being kicked off, but Rachel was then told she had to do all the assessments for the O-levels and GCSEs and A-levels. So she got rather busy, and we'll probably be looking at doing that next term now, in all reality, rather than this term.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any questions for Jack or comments? No, thank you very much, Jack, for that update. So agenda item 7 then, the minutes action log of the committee held on the 28th of September 2020. Could you, it's a long time, but if you can cast your minds back, are there any matters of correction? No. If no one spotted anything, can we then agree that those are an accurate record of that meeting? Thank you. And any updates on the actions? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Now, in terms of the questions, listening to you, responding to questions, I understand the first 2 questions have been sent, the answers to those have been sent to the person who made the requests. We've had 3 questions which have been received and are summarised. People asking whether they have to be vaccinated every year and what the preparations are. Difficulties being encountered by people to get medicines from pharmacies when they need, long waiting times and so on. And then concerns from patients that they can't see their GP in person, are only being assessed on the phone. I don't know whether there is a response to that 3rd one available.
Viv, we're still waiting for the relevant health board representative to provide a response to that, but I have emailed the requester separately to advise them where we're at, so I'm chasing. Okay, all right, thank you. I don't know whether there are any more. Are there any more questions for us to deal with? Nothing received in advance, unless anybody on the call has got any additional questions you'd like to invite from. No. All right. Well, thank you. So then the next meeting will be on the 5th of July, we hope, all being well, at 10:30 via Teams again. Thank you very much. Yeah. Viv, I think the decision was that July was a bit soon after this meeting, because we're looking at 6 weeks away. So I think we were looking at September if members were agreeable. Yeah, sorry, I remember we did discuss that, but it was down here on the agenda, so sorry. I thought perhaps I was wrong. Is everyone agreed that it would be September would make much more sense? Obviously it would, wouldn't it? Thank you, and thank you all for attending and for your contributions. See you all again in September. That concludes the meeting.
Thanks, Viv. Good to see you all.
Diolch. Thank you. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.